Dear esteemed Middle East Monitor guests and audiences, thank you so much for your time. Today, I'm honored to host highly esteemed guests to beautifully enlighten our audience on the La Convivencia, religious tolerance, the term coming from Cordoba, Al-Andalusia period. When I think about the injustices in the world and the innocent children being killed in Gaza, in Bosnia, where I dedicated my 5 years to support Bosnian women mentally and spiritually. This concept, La Convivencia, where I learned in Cordoba during my interreligious trip, where the Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in a very, very peaceful, relative peace environment, with ilim, with zikr, with peace, with abundance. So I think today it would be amazing to talk about this concept in the 21st century with Dr. Amineh. She is the right person for this topic. I think she's the best person. So please, first of all, I would love to welcome Dr. Amineh. Dr. Amineh, thank you so much for your time. Hi, hello, merhaba.
Thank you, Elif. Assalamu alaikum. Lovely to be here with you and honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Amineh. Briefly, I would love to give information about your knowledge and your background, Dr. Amineh. Dr. Amineh Hoti from the University of Cambridge has over 20 years of experience leading interfaith dialogue, conflict mediation, and community engagement throughout the world. She has served as a peace studies director, professor, and researcher for more than 2 decades and has extensive leadership experience on several continents all around the world. Dr. Amineh was the executive director of the Center for Dialogue and Action and also co-founding director of the first Center for the Study of Muslim-Jewish Relations in Cambridge and of the Center for Dialogue and Action at Lucy Cavendish College at University of Cambridge, again, here in the United Kingdom. So, Dr. Amineh has completed her PhD in social anthropology. She's esteemed anthropologist at Lucy, and also she's an honorary professor at the University of Nottingham. Dr. Amineh, thank you so much again for your time, for your dedication, for your ilm. And Jazakallah khairan. My first question is, you studied in Christian school in Pakistan, and as we know, your grandfather, the Wali, king of the Swat in Pakistan, who was known for his swift justice, had encouraged nuns, Christian nuns, to set up a school for the girls, for the females in the region. So, therefore, you were very familiar with the Christian community since your childhood. They run schools, universities, churches, those Christian communities, and they play very high key roles in all public areas of life, especially in your life as well. As your amazing multicultural background highlights this, so my first question will be about this concept, la convivencia. How can we apply this Al-Andalusian term concept of la convivencia? It is called coexistence, as you highlighted in your book, in current conflict resolution process right now in 21st century in the global atmosphere for the sake of peace.
Thank you, Elif. That's an important question. I'd like to step back for a minute to go back to my background so that you know the context that I come from.
Mhm.
You mentioned my grandfather, who was the Wali of Swat and who set up the first schools in the 1920s for girls. And in fact, Malala Yousafzai, who's the Nobel Peace Prize winner, her father studied in one of those schools that he set up, but also Malala benefited from. So she comes out of that tradition where schools were being set up in this area in northern Pakistan and Swat. I myself went to one of those convent schools which he had set up and allowed, which later, when the Taliban took over, they blew up that school, that convent school, sadly. So there was always a battle between those who wanted to have peace building or convivencia or inclusiveness, and those who were exclusivist, sadly. And so I've, in that tradition, always been struggling and striving for scholarship, for knowledge for women, despite all the challenges, the cultural and all the challenges that I have faced in my own life personally and through my experiences. So I want to really say, Aleph, that when we're looking at convivencia, this concept of coexistence, we humanize the other. So often in conflict situations, other communities are dehumanized. They're seen as animals, or their derogatory terms are used to describe them. And then it becomes easy to, once you label them, you use derogatory terms, then it's easy to commit genocide. But if we do the opposite, which is humanize them and see them as part of the human family and part of God's creatures and God's children, like they do in Christianity, for example. But that's, if you see it as a metaphor, then what happens is it's no longer us versus them, but it becomes one human family. And the human body or the human person in all faiths are sacred. And that's why even in war, for example, in Islam, in the Muslim faith, you can't, in war, damage the face because it is in the image of God. So it's a very sacred concept, the human being, and we must give it that sense of dignity and respect. And that is something to highlight that existed in Andalusian Spain at the time when Muslims ruled, but alongside Christians and Jews who played key roles in society. And therefore, that period was called La Convivencia. So recently, when we did research in Journey into Europe, which was a Brookings project that took us to 9 European countries, and with my father, Professor Akbar Ahmed, who was leading the project. And I interviewed a whole group of women converts in that famous mosque in Andalusia. And it's a beautiful interview, but it really reflects that sense of, what convivencia is. For example, when we said our prayers at the mosque, then the women turned around and kissed each other. And I haven't seen that before in any other mosque, but it was a very warm feeling, which reflected that period of coexistence, where we had different communities living side by side, but sharing knowledge, learning from each other, walking together, traveling together, living in a community as one. So that concept of love is so important, it's so healing, as opposed to hate. Hate is very toxic, it's very destructive, and hate then eventually leads to genocide and to awful things that one themselves regrets. So it's not just the receiver, it's not just the people who are receiving at the receiving end, but the perpetrators will also regret this hate because it eventually comes back. So recently when I engaged with the United Nations Office on Genocide Prevention and the responsibility to protect, their whole theme and concept was looking at how dangerous hate is and what role it played in genocide. And this was a project that I did with about 200 universities from South Asia, from Pakistan, who plugged into this conference. And we had people from Europe, we had scholars, we had academics, then we had people from my book. We had the Baha'i come in, we had a Parsi come in, we had a Hindu expert come in, we had a Buddhist expert come in, and a Sikh. So it became a great diversity of voices in terms of what they saw as important. the important challenges and what we need in order to heal our world. Because if we only stay with hate, we see Srebrenica, we see the Holocaust, we see horrible stories that we did in Dachau and all these horrible concentration camps. So we see all the negativity. But if through knowledge and through this interfaith work and through scholarship, through the social sciences, through spirituality, the concept of Rahma, Rahman and Rahim, if through all these beautiful concepts and through education in schools and universities, with policymakers, we encourage the peace building, then we see the opposite. We see la convivencia, as we did in Spain. And then we saw another concept of la benevolencia in Bosnia. When there was war, there were communities reaching out to each other and helping each other and protecting each other from persecution, from being killed. And I think that's a beautiful example. We need much more of that than the other example of hate, because hate is, again, very dangerous, very toxic for our world. And we see it right now in different pockets of the world. And sadly, the Muslims are at the receiving end. But the problem with hate is that it is like fire. Fire doesn't stop to one room. It burns the whole house down. And this world is like a house. We've got a house with different communities. We've got different ethnicities. We've got people of different cultures or genders. But we have to learn to live together. And that's my message, to learn to live together in peace and with mutual respect and understanding. And for that, Alif, one needs a bit of humility and to learn from our beautiful stories and our rich cultures that we have. All these cultures come with rich histories. So we really have to open up that mindset to have the humility to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. That's amazing. So, as you highlighted, interfaith in a very intellectual way, um, um, I would love to ask this question first of all by giving background with your PhD. After your PhD, you set up an interfaith center at your college in Cambridge. So, the Society for Dialogue and Action, it is the name for your center, where you took people all faiths to the churches, mosques, and other religious places. So, can you please give more background about this Interfaith Center and what is the important role of interfaith peacemakers in the times of war in Gaza, in Syria, in Rwanda, Dr. Amineh?
Thank you, Alif. This question, Alif, has really puzzled me and bothered me, especially in this time when there's so much happening in the world and there's so many pockets of war, of genocide, of a terrible situation where little kids are being slaughtered. And also, it's a very difficult time right now. And I keep asking myself, because I've been engaged in interfaith leadership, scholarship for a few decades now across the world. And I keep asking myself, where are the interfaith voices? A lot of people are quiet, a lot of people are withdrawn. And I do feel that, we have fancy conferences, interfaith conferences, we have discussions, we have cups of tea. But really, you need to step up at times of need when humanity needs this understanding. Feed the poor, help the people who are under persecution, and help bridge the gap. Because often what happens in times of war is that communities divide. So you become black and white. You have two groups. The world divides into two very black and white groups, and they split into one camp or the other. But with interfaith, there is a possibility of more nuance, especially if you attach scholarship and interfaith dialogue. So you see in between, for example, you see where there are people from one group maybe supporting humanity, the idea of protecting people, the idea of giving dignity to all of humanity, regardless of their religious backgrounds. And there's so many very good examples that we have recently in Bosnia, which itself faced genocide. And very sadly, the incident of Srebrenica took place where a lot of young boys were handcuffed and killed, lots of them, which is
Yes.
awful in the heart of Europe again. Yet, Bosnia was brave enough to host a conference last month. And the conference was really about the parliamentarians and religious leaders coming together to work on coexistence and peace. And they did not back down, but they referred to their own terrible tragedies, linking to the bravery of the mothers of Srebrenica, the mothers who had, despite their own tragedies, some of them had lost 58 members, male members of their family. And yet they were brave enough to continue that battle, to struggle on, to strive on, and to speak for peace. And they had nothing, Elif, in their heart but love. They didn't have a drop of vengeance or revenge or anger or hatred. And that sort of healing process is something that is really needed for the world today. So interfaith really is about action. And that's why when I was setting up the center in Cambridge at my college, at the university, we didn't have a center like this where we were combining the academic scholarship, but also with action. So it was dialogue and action. And in fact, the first person who gave me some funding for this project said, you scholars talk too much. We want a bit of action. So I said, okay, great, I will. That's my work. I would love to combine scholarship with the concept of action. So yes, Elif, very good question. Where are the interfaith scholars? And are they speaking up? Are they helping heal the world? Because remember, both the Muslim community and the Jewish community are part of the same Abrahamic family. And we don't want people in one group or the other. We want people bringing them together. They say in our tradition, it's sawab, or it's healing, or it's a brownie point. If you hold the hand of two brothers or two cousins who are fighting, you hold their hand and you join them together in friendship. That's a very healing process. It's a beautiful process. So interfaith scholars can possibly play that role. And I would love to see more of that rather than backing up and canceling conferences, as happened in a few cases.
Honorable Dr. Amineh, you are such a role model for me and for other ladies all around the world in terms of, flexibility, sisterhood, soul sisterhood, and also supporting, other sisters. Before asking a special question about your amazing book, I would be very happy to briefly mention about your life story, about your health. You're a beautiful mother, and I know a couple of years ago you have been diagnosed with cancer. Since your treatment, you have been giving life again after your treatment. So, what is the most important thing you learned during this period and maintain the peace of mind individually for you?
Thank you, Elif. It was a very difficult period because I was director of the Seerath project. And suddenly I was diagnosed for cancer while I was visiting my parents. And you can imagine that cancer a few years ago was like a death warrant.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very difficult message to receive. And I had little children. I had so much that I wanted to complete. And I had just begun my book. And above all and above everything, I wanted to complete that book if I was to go to the next world, I wanted to do my book very fast and before that. So I found out, Elif, that at that time, with all the cancer, chemotherapy, with the surgery, etc., I got a lot of love and respect from all the people with me, from my parents, from my brothers, from my husband, my children, and especially the interfaith family. I had been in touch with the UAE team who organized this wonderful conference every year. I'd been in touch with a few scholars in New York, in all over the world, and they were sending messages of love and support. And for me, that was very, very moving when they were reaching out to me in this way, just like a family member. And that's what I wanted to see, not just for me, but for everybody in the world, the sense of healing and reaching out. And so I really learned through my experience, through this very hard experience of being diagnosed for cancer and then chemotherapy, that life is temporary. We have this illusion that we're here for long, but it's really temporary. And it is something that is worth living if one really begins to, if you get a diagnosis like this, it shakes you up. You're no longer your comfortable self. Although Rabbi says again and again in the Quran that life is temporary and every soul will taste of death. But with something so real and so close to you, and when death is almost looming above you, you do realize that it's worth living if you really fully understand life, and then you live with that passion for your family, for your humanity, for the world, to do that tiny bit of good that makes your own life worth it. So while I was diagnosed, Elif, and while I was going through all this very difficult period, because with chemotherapy, you have side effects and all. I was also editing my book called Gems and Jewels, The Religions of Pakistan, which is on 10 religious communities. And it was such a pure pleasure, Elif, to read some of these stories that I had already interviewed. I had interviewed people, and I had done this book research for 5 years. I had interviewed these wonderful communities and such diverse communities who wanted to be recognized, who wanted to be heard, who wanted their stories to be told. And there were stories of love and hope and of life. It was beautiful, beautiful, rich material. And I loved learning so much through that, through editing my book again, because I was sitting in DC with my parents, and the editor was in Pakistan. So it was a whole world of difference. And I had such a struggle editing the book. But while I read the story of, for example, Imam Busiri, who's a beautiful saint and who wrote, he was unwell and very sick. One night he wrote a beautiful poem on the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. And the poem was so beautiful that at night, Rasulullah came to him and put on his own robe onto him, the burda. So this poem is called the burda. And it's now so famous. It's one of the most sung verses. And it says, blessings on the Prophet in both worlds, in this world. And so it's a form of ishq Rasul. It's the love for the Prophet. And ishq ilahi, love for beloved Allah. And love for humanity. So this is what I was finding in my book. Although it's based in scholarship, but there was a lot of spirituality. I was finding that love coming across in all the faith communities. There was a love for God. There was a love for humanity. There was a sense of inclusiveness. And that for me in itself was so healing. So just before this surgery I was going into, I was trying to edit. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I was working really hard. And my dad said, you remind me of the old scholars who just before dying, they're writing their last notes and poems and all. So for me, it was a very great passion to learn about these wonderful figures and heroes, really, like Rasulullah, peace be upon him, Imam Hussein, There's Buddha, who I learned about, beautiful life story. Again, he goes away from the hustle, just like our prophet did, as did Zarathustra, from the Parsi faith. So there's beautiful stories again. There's Baba Guru Nanak, there's about Jesus, there's the Hindu faith. So there's a lot of richness in the world and in our faith communities. But often what I found through my own experience, that I had so much more to learn and I had learned so little. And this short journey that I did with these communities allowed me to share that, love and connection with them. So now when I meet them, we have this great bond and this great mutual respect.
Dr. Amineh, in 2022, I was humbled to be invited to your speech on your masterpiece book, Gems and Jewels, to the Turkish Cultural Center Yunus Emre Institute. So during your valuable speech, you said, this research book has always been a bridge between cultures and continents, the East and West, beautifully and spiritually. So, what is the chemistry of your book to build peace across the world, not only in Pakistan, but globally for global abundance and global peace all around the world?
Thank you, Elif. Elif, I'm an anthropologist and I'm a field researcher. So really going out into the field and doing scholarship, interviewing, writing notes, looking at data, recording them from their perspective. And when I came across this rich landscape, which really is reflection of the world is full of ethnic, religious, cultural diversity. We have so many different communities. So we can't say only me and my perspective matter. We have to be humble and passionate enough while we're living this temporary life to hear other people, to respect other people, and to give them their own space. The world is big enough, like Rabbi says in the Quran, the East and West, it's big enough to accommodate all human beings and their perspectives. So if we listen and we accommodate, it's such a rich world. But if we don't, then it becomes a very exclusive world. It's just me and my family. And that's, again, quite toxic. So it's something that with this anthropological work, with this background, I was able to interview, as I said, people from the Jain community, Zoroastrians, the Parsis, the Kalasha, the Jews of South Asia, and especially in Pakistan, the Buddhists. I interviewed Baha'is, Christians, Hindus, and Muslims. And because it's our culture of adab, adab is where you give priority or respect to communities that are smaller in number. I put the smaller communities in the book first, and I put my own community, which is the largest and the most dominant in Pakistan, right at the end. So it's a sense of loving respect, but through my work, I was able to hear their perspective. What are they saying? What are their stories? Who are their heroes? What are their challenges? We need to, if we really want to know each other, because again, I keep loving this beautiful verse which says, I made you so that you may know one another. And that for me is anthropology. So getting your pen and paper out and getting to know different communities, different people. It's a beautiful journey because it challenges you yourself in your perspective, but you also broaden your perspective by learning about others. So while learning about all these communities, it helped me reflect that this sort of, work where we are seeing this diversity needs to be multiplied. We need to bring this message to schools, to universities, to policymakers, to the media, because often the media too has only their one perspective. So again, broadening that sense of acceptance. We need to accept, we need to have mutual respect. We need to have deeper understanding. And the only way, Elif, we can do it is through the social sciences in particular, and by visiting and by listening and by hearing and by giving space to other cultures. So what this book allowed me was to really see the lives of such inspiring people whose message was just simply, we want to live in harmony. We want to live your concept of coexistence. This was the concept of coexistence. This is you see, for example, a Sikh family, you see a Christian family, you see a Muslim family, all living in the same little neighborhood, all helping each other, helping each other's kids. When they come back from school, the kids can go from one house to another. So there's this sense of humanity, there's a sense of love, there's a sense of respect. And that is what is missing today more widely. Elif, if one team says it's just my voice, it's only my perspective that counts, and I'm the boss and I do what you say, you do what I say, that doesn't work. Therefore, humility is something that I learned in this book, and something that I think would be very valuable for the world, especially in today's light. Because if you have humility, and all the stories, Elif, all the stories that I read and talk about in the book, talk about a sense of overcoming your ego. Because the biggest challenge is us, it's me, myself. The first challenge is to battle within myself, all the negativity that I have, and then go help others. But we don't point a finger to others and then say, no, I'm going to just protect my own insecurity. So this book was in that sense very beautiful. It was very healing for me personally. And I do think it has a message for humanity. In fact, Elif, many years, I think it was during that time of doing my chemotherapy that I had a dream. And I saw that I was in this beautiful garden. It was really beautifully manicured. And there was beautiful flowers, and the garden was really very beautiful. And I enter, and there are these people who run towards me and hug me. And they're people of different faiths. They're Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, all of them, and they hug me. And I'm like a mother to them. And I hug them and embrace them like this. So it was a very comforting feeling, very healing feeling to be motherly. And that word of Rahma, because that word Rahman and Rahim comes from the mother's womb. So women have a lot to offer to interfaith, to leadership, to dialogue, because they have that greater empathy. And so that there's a lot to offer and to learn from, including not just religious, ethnic communities, but also women in the equation of interfaith and the wider dialogue. So I really appreciate your role, Elif, in what you do and in your role in this.
Dr. Amineh, thank you so much for your intellectual harmony and spiritual also informations and knowledge and ilm. Thank you so much. Today you enlighten us. I'm really, really honored for your dedication, for your time. So, dear audiences, today we hosted Dr. Amineh. Thank you so much for your time. Our webpage, Middle East Monitor's webpage, generously and kindly will welcome you if you want to watch and rewatch this interview, spiritual interview again. Thank you so much.